My parents divorced, and in court they fought fiercely over my custody. Mom cried with tears streaming down her face. The child should stay with me. I'm his real mother. Dad's eyes were red. I can give him a better life. The judge looked at me. Child, who do you choose? I looked at Mom, then at Dad. I choose Dad. The entire courtroom breathed a sigh of relief, thinking it was settled. But I turned to face the judge and asked, seriously, can my brother in the freezer come with me, too? The courtroom instantly fell into an eerie silence. The judge's pen dropped to the floor, and Mom's face turned deathly pale. The air in the courtroom was stifling, mixed with suppressed breathing sounds. My mom, Sarah, was crying her heart out. Your Honor, Tommy must stay with me. I'm his real mother. No one loves him more than I do. Her voice trembled, tears falling like broken pearls, each one striking the hearts of family and friends in the gallery. Dad, Michael sat on the other side, his eyes red, fists clenched tight. I can give Tommy a better life, better education. Sarah, you can't even support yourself right now. His voice was hoarse, full of exhaustion and anger. The judge tapped his gavel, and the brief commotion in the courtroom immediately quieted. He removed his glasses, looking at me with gentle but scrutinizing eyes. Tommy Wilson, would you like to stay with Dad or Mom? All eyes focused on my small frame like spotlights. My name is Tommy Wilson. I'm 7 years old. I looked at my crying mom. Her makeup was smeared, making her look pitiful. I looked at Dad with his bloodshot eyes. He seemed like he hadn't slept all night. They both said they loved me. I pressed my lips together, stood up from my chair, and spoke quietly but clearly enough. I choose Dad. Dad's body visibly relaxed, letting out a long breath like he'd just been pulled from water. Mom's crying stopped abruptly. She looked at me in disbelief, her eyes filled with shock and hurt. The judge and lawyers also seemed relieved. A difficult tug of war finally had a resolution. The judge picked up his pen, ready to record. Everyone in the courtroom thought the final matter of this divorce case was settled. But I didn't sit down. I turned around, facing the judge beneath the national emblem, and asked a question in the most serious tone of my 7 years. Judge, can my brother in the freezer come with me, too? Time seemed frozen in that moment. The stifling breathing sounds in the air disappeared. Mom sobbing, Dad sighing, the lawyer's whispers, everything vanished. The courtroom fell into deathly silence. Click. A crisp sound broke the eerie quiet. It was the judge's pen falling onto the thick case files, then rolling to the floor. I saw his face instantly turned pale as a sheet, even whiter than Mom's. Tear-stained face. The court reporter's typing fingers froze midair. Dad's lawyer's mouth hung open, forgetting what he was about to say. Mom's lawyer, that woman who had been eloquently arguing, stared blankly like her soul had left the body and my parents. Her expressions were the most dramatic. Dad Michael's face, which had just relaxed, now showed complete bewilderment and terror. He looked at me, his lips moving but unable to make any sound. Tommy, what did you say? Mom, Sarah. The sadness on her face was instantly replaced by a more extreme emotion. It was an expression mixing horror, fear, and despair. Her body began shaking uncontrollably, like the last withered leaf in autumn wind. What are you talking about? Her voice was shrill, cutting through the courtroom silence, and tearing apart all her previous pretenses. The judge shot up, so suddenly he knocked over his chair. Order! Order! He pointed at the bailiffs with trembling fingers. Immediately call the police. Seal the scene. No, seal their house. The bailiffs snapped out of their shock, immediately rushing over to stand behind my parents, one on each side. Dad was still in massive accusation. He just reached out and pulled me tightly into his arms. His body was shaking, trembling even more than Mom. Tommy, tell Daddy what you just said. What brother? Which freezer? I leaned against him, feeling his heartbeat. I didn't answer, just looked up at the judge again. Sir, my brother is in that big white freezer at home. He's been sleeping for a long time. We promised to leave together. Police sirens grew from distant to near, piercing the quiet above the courthouse. Dad held me tightly, his arms like iron bands, squeezing me until it hurt a little, but I didn't struggle. I knew Dad was scared. Several officers in uniform walked in, led by a serious-looking middle-aged man named Captain Johnson. The judge briefly explained the situation to him. With each word, Captain Johnson's face grew darker. Finally, his gaze fell on me. That look was sharp but not scrutinizing like the judge's. He seemed to want to read something from my face. Little friend, your name is Tommy Wilson. I nodded. What you just said. Is it true? I nodded again. You're not lying. Teacher says lying isn't what good kids do. I answered seriously. Captain Johnson's Adam's apple bob. He turned to the officers behind him and gave orders. Team 1, take Sarah and Michael separately for questioning. Team 2, come with me to their house. Notify the tech team in corner immediately. Dad didn't want to let me go. With red eyes, he told Captain Johnson, my son is still young. He can't be alone. He'll come with me. Captain Johnson interrupted. We need him to identify the scene. Mom was supported by 2 female officers. She had stopped crying, just looking ashen and hollow-eyed like a puppet. As she passed by me, she suddenly struggled, staring at me intensely. Tommy Wilson, why are you saying this? Why are you trying to hurt me? Her voice was full of venom. Dad angrily shouted back, Sarah, shut up. What did you do to Tommy? The scene became chaotic again, and Captain Johnson waved his hand. And Mom was quickly escorted from the courtroom. Dad was also taken away. He kept looking back, his eyes full of worry. People gradually left the courtroom, but the lingering shock on everyone's faces showed that today's events would become their lifelong specter. I got into Captain Johnson's police car. The car was quiet, only occasional static from the radio. Tommy, can you tell me where your house is? Captain Johnson's voice was gentle. I gave him the address. The car drove steadily down on the road, scenery flying backward outside the window. The brother you mentioned, who is he? Just my brother. What's his name? I shook my head. I don't know. Mom wouldn't let me ask Captain Johnson's friend. How long has he been in the freezer? A long time. I thought about it. From winter to summer, the air in the car seemed to drop several degrees. Soon, we arrived at our house. It was an old apartment complex. Our home was on the 3rd floor. Several police cars were already parked downstairs, with long police tape stretched around. Neighbors peeked out, talking among themselves. Captain Johnson put a hat and mask on me, protecting me in his arms, as we walked through the crowd. The front door was opened by technical personnel. Everything in the house was exactly as I'd left it. On the coffee table in the living room sat Mom's half-finished glass of water. Our family photo hung on the wall. Dad, Mom, and I all smiling happily, but I knew it was all fake. This home had been cold for a long time. Several officers filed in wearing gloves and shoe covers, moving professionally and quickly. Captain Johnson crouched down to my eye level. Tommy, where's the freezer you mentioned? My heart beat a little faster. I pointed toward the corner of the balcony. There sat a waist-high white bosom freezer, the most power-hungry appliance in our house. Mom always said it held meat for New Year's. Couldn't be opened randomly, or the cold air would escape. On the freezer's exterior was a crooked car tin sticker. I had put it there. Everyone's gaze converged on that freezer. It sat there quietly, making a soft humming sound, like a silent beast in the summer sunlight. That white exterior somehow felt bone-chillingly cold. Captain Johnson stood up and nodded to the corner, and technical staff behind him. One officer stepped forward with tool, preparing to pry open the small rusted lock on the freezer. Another officer walked behind the freezer and bent down. Report, Captain Johnson. Power is still connected. Captain Johnson took a deep breath and waved his hand open it. The screech of metal against metal set my teeth on edge. The officer with the pry bar grunted, putting his weight into it. The rusted padlock on the freezer didn't put up much of a fight. It snapped with a sharp crack, the broken piece clattering against the balcony's concrete floor. Captain Johnson didn't move immediately. He stood there, his broad shoulders blocking the afternoon sun, casting a long, dark shadow over the appliance. He exchanged a look with the crime scene technician, a silent communication between men who had seen too much of what human beings could do to one another. Open it, Johnson repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. The technician reached out with gloved hands and gripped the edge of the heavy white lid. The rubber seal, frozen shut from months of undisturbed slumber, tore away with a sickening, wet tearing sound. A dense cloud of frigid, white vapor instantly spilled over the edges, curling around their boots like dry ice on a stage. The smell hit them a second later. It wasn't the overpowering stench of rot. The extreme cold had prevented that. Instead, it was a sharp, metallic odor mixed with freon, freezer burn, and the sickly sweet scent of old, frozen blood. Johnson pulled his collar up over his nose. The technician stepped back, coughing violently into his elbow. I stood in the doorway, watching them. The apartment felt unnaturally quiet, save for the low hum of the freezer's motor kicking into overdrive to compensate for the open lid. Johnson leaned over the edge, peering into the icy depths. The muscles in his jaw locked. He didn't gasp, didn't swear. The absolute stillness of his body was far more terrifying than if he had screamed. He slowly turned his head toward the technician. Get the camera. Now. I couldn't see inside from where I stood, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was in there. Beneath the layer of frost-bitten bags of frozen vegetables and cheap steaks my dad had bought on sale, there was a heavy black industrial trash bag, bound tight with silver duct tape. And inside that bag was Leo. Johnson walked over to me. His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, were suddenly very tired. He crouched down, ignoring the dirt on the floor, and placed his heavy, warm hands on my shoulders. "Tommy," he said gently, though I could hear the slight tremor in his voice. "We're going to take a ride down to the station, okay? You're going to get some ice cream. You like strawberry." "I like vanilla," I said softly. "Vanilla it is." He stood up, shielding my view of the balcony with his body. "Officer Ramirez is going to take you to the car. Don't look back, Tommy. Just keep looking at her." I nodded and took the female officer's hand. As we walked out of the apartment, the radio on Johnson's shoulder crackled to life. "Dispatch, this is Captain Johnson. I need the coroner at my location. We have a 10 to 54. Juvenile." The precinct was a blur of ringing phones, clicking keyboards, and the smell of stale coffee. Officer Ramirez had given me a cup of vanilla ice cream, but it was melting into a sugary soup. I wasn't hungry. Through the blinds of the room they put me in, I could see down the hallway. They had put Mom in interrogation room A and Dad in interrogation room B. They couldn't see each other. They couldn't coordinate their stories. Captain Johnson walked into the observation room next to Mom's interrogation room. I knew because a nice lady with a notepad sitting with me told me he was going to talk to my parents about a few things. Inside room A, Sarah was a ghost. Her expensive courtroom clothes were wrinkled, her makeup completely washed away by tears, leaving her face splotchy and raw. She sat with her arms wrapped around her torso, rocking back and forth in the metal chair. Johnson entered and tossed a manila folder onto the metal table. The smack made her flinch violently. "Sarah," Johnson began, not sitting down. He loomed over her. "Let's skip the part where you deny it. We opened the freezer. We found the bag." Mom let out a sound that wasn't human. It was a high, keening wail of an animal caught in a trap. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving. "Oh God. Oh God. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Who is he?" Johnson demanded, his voice hard. "Tommy said it's his brother. You only have one child on record." "Who is the boy in the freezer?" His name was Leo," she sobbed, the words tumbling out of her in a rush of panic and despair. He was mine. From before Michael. From a man who hurt me. I was pregnant when I met Michael, but I didn't know. When I found out, Michael was away on a long business trip." Johnson frowned, pulling out a chair and sitting. "You hid an entire pregnancy from your husband?" "I'm small," she cried defensively. "I barely showed. And Michael was gone for 7 months, building that firm in Chicago. When he came back, I told him I had a miscarriage. But I didn't. I gave birth to Leo. But Leo wasn't right." "What do you mean, not right?" "He was sick," she whispered, staring blankly at the table. "Lungs, heart. He cried all the time. But I couldn't tell Michael. Michael hates weakness. He would have left me. He would have thrown me out. So I paid a woman to watch him. But then she moved away, and I had nowhere to put him. So I brought him home." "You hid a child in your apartment?" "In the spare room. The one we kept locked because of the draft." She wiped her nose with the back of her trembling hand. "I kept him quiet. I fed him. I loved him. I swear I did. But he got sick. Really sick. It was a Tuesday. Michael was at work. Tommy was at school. Leo stopped breathing. I tried to do CPR, but he just stopped." She looked up at Johnson, her eyes wide with desperate pleading. I panicked. If I called the police, Michael would find out. He would divorce me. I'd lose Tommy. I'd lose everything. I put him in a bag. I told myself it was temporary, just until I could figure out what to do. But then, it became a week. Then a month. Then a year. I couldn't open it anymore. I couldn't. Johnson stared at her, utterly repulsed. "You kept your dead child in a freezer with your groceries, and you just went about your life?" "No," she screamed. "It ruined me. It ate me alive. Why do you think Michael and I are divorcing?" The guilt drove me insane. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. And then today, in court, she broke down again. When Tommy mentioned him, I knew it was over. I knew. Johnson let her cry. He wrote down a few notes. It was a textbook case of panic, neglect, and concealment of a corpse. Sickening, but straightforward. He left Mom to her tears and walked down the hall to interrogation room B. Dad was sitting straight up, his hands folded neatly on the table. He looked devastated, but composed. The picture of a strong man trying to hold himself together for the sake of his family. "Captain," Dad said as Johnson walked in, "please tell me this is a nightmare. Please tell me my wife is crazy. What did you find in my house?" Johnson sat down slowly. "We found a child, Michael. A little boy. In the freezer on your balcony." Dad closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. He let out a shuddering breath. "My God. She really did it. She actually did it." "You sound like you suspected something, Sarah." Dad shook his head, looking heartbroken. "Sarah has been unstable for years. Paranoia, mood swings. I tried to get her help. That's why I filed for divorce. I couldn't let Tommy be around her anymore. But a child? A body? I thought she just had hoarding issues. She wouldn't let anyone near that freezer. She said it was her space. I work 80 hours a week, Captain. I just wanted peace when I came home. I never looked inside. He leaned forward, looking Johnson dead in the eye. Is Tommy safe? Tell me my son is safe. Tommy is fine, Johnson said evenly. He's the one who pointed us to the freezer. He said his brother was in there. Tommy has an active imagination, Dad said quickly. Too quickly. Sarah must have fed him some sick delusion. You know how mothers manipulate kids in custody battles. She probably told him there was a monster in there to scare him. Johnson leaned back, studying Dad. There was something off. Sarah was a mess, a shattered pane of glass. But Michael? Michael was a polished mirror. He was reflecting exactly what a grieving, shocked husband should look like. But there were no cracks. Your wife just confessed, Michael. Johnson bluffed slightly. She said she hid the child from you. Dad let out a long breath, slumping back in his chair as if a massive weight had been lifted. Thank God. I mean, it's a tragedy. A horrific tragedy. But I'm glad she told the truth. I just want custody of my boy, Captain. I want to take Tommy far away from that monster. Johnson stood up. Don't leave town, Mr. Wilson. We'll be in touch. The autopsy report came back 48 hours later. Johnson was sitting in his office, rubbing his temples, when the medical examiner, Dr. Aris, walked in and dropped the thick file on his desk. She didn't look happy. Read it, she said. Johnson opened the file. Cause of death, asphyxiation. Wait. Sarah said he died of an asthma attack. Natural causes. He didn't, Dr. Aris said, her voice tight. There was bruising around the nose and mouth. Petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes. Someone held a hand over that boy's face until he stopped breathing. Johnson felt a cold knot form in his stomach. It's a murder. Worse, Aris said. She pointed a pen at the second page. Look at the tissue samples from the lungs and the nasal cavity. See the microscopic frost damage. Yeah, because he was frozen. No, Jim, Aris said softly. The frost damage is deep in the alveolar sacs. The only way ice crystals form that deep inside the lungs. Johnson's blood ran cold. He was breathing the cold air in. He wasn't dead when he went into the freezer, Aris confirmed, her face pale. He was unconscious from the asphyxiation, but his heart was still beating. He woke up inside that plastic bag, inside that freezer. He froze to death, Jim. Johnson stood up, so fast his chair hit the wall. Son of a bitch. This wasn't a panicked mother hiding a tragic accident. This was a brutal, calculated murder. He grabbed his coat. Where's the kid? Where's Tommy? Child Protective Services placed him in a temporary foster home across town, Aris said. I need to talk to him. The foster home was a nice place with a big backyard, but I was sitting on the front porch steps, drawing with a box of crayons they gave me. A dark blue sedan pulled up and Captain Johnson got out. He looked tired. He walked up the driveway and sat down next to me on the steps. Hey, Tommy, he said. Hi, Captain. I didn't look up. I was coloring the sky. I used a dark, bruised purple instead of blue. Whatcha drawing? Our apartment. Johnson looked at the paper. It was a crude child's drawing, but accurate. There was the living room, the kitchen, and the balcony. And on the balcony, a big white box. Tommy, Johnson said, his voice very careful. I need you to be a brave boy for me today. I need you to answer some questions, and I need you to be completely honest. Can you do that? I stopped coloring. Like in court? Under oath. Johnson blinked, surprised by my vocabulary, but nodded. Exactly like in court. Okay. You said Mom wouldn't let you ask about the freezer. Did Mom put Leo in there? I shook my head. Mom didn't go near the balcony. She was too scared. Scared of what? Scared of Dad. Johnson leaned closer. Tommy, did your dad know about Leo? I finally looked up at him. Dad was the one who found him. I was hiding in the closet playing hide and seek. Dad came home early from work. He heard a noise in the locked room. He broke the door open. Johnson pulled out his recorder and clicked it on. What happened then, Tommy? I closed my eyes. Even now, the memory made my chest hurt. Dad was yelling. Really loud. He asked Mom whose kid it was. Mom was crying, on her knees. She said she was sorry. Dad said Leo was a parasite. He said he wasn't going to pay to raise another man's mistake. Then what? Dad grabbed Leo. Leo was crying. Dad put his hand over Leo's mouth, so he'd be quiet. He held it there for a long, long time, until Leo went to sleep. Johnson's breath hitched. Where was Mom? Mom was screaming, trying to pull Dad off. But Dad hit her. She fell and hit her head on the table. When she woke up, Dad had a big black bag. I looked down at my drawing. I took a black crayon and started violently scribbling over the white box on the balcony. Dad put Leo in the bag. He put the tape on it. He dragged it to the balcony. Mom was crying, asking what he did. Dad told her if she ever told anyone, he would do the same thing to me. I looked at Johnson. My eyes were completely dry. Dad told Mom that she killed Leo. He said she was a bad mom, and if she went to the police, she would go to jail forever, because no one would believe her. He said he was the only one who could protect us. Johnson stared at me, appalled by the sheer, monstrous manipulation. Michael hadn't just murdered a child. He had gaslit his wife into believing she was an accomplice, holding her own son hostage as collateral. "Why didn't you tell anyone, Tommy?" Johnson asked gently. "Dad was always watching," I said simply. "He put cameras in the house. He checked Mom's phone. When they started fighting over the divorce, Dad said he was taking me away. Mom fought him in court because she wanted to get me away from him. She knew what he did. But in court," Johnson frowned, trying to piece the puzzle together. "In court, you chose Dad. If you knew he was a bad man, why did you choose him?" I put the crayon down. I looked out at the street. If I chose Mom, Dad would just get mad. He would take his stuff and leave. He would move away, and Leo would stay in the box forever. No one would ever know. I turned to look Captain Johnson right in his eyes. But I knew the judge was listening. I knew the police were there. I knew Dad couldn't hurt me in a room full of people. So I chose him. I made him happy. I made him feel safe. My voice dropped to a whisper. And then I brought up the freezer. Because I knew if I said I wanted to live with Dad and I wanted my brother to come with us, you would have to go to Dad's house and look. You would catch him with the box. Johnson sat in stunned silence. He was looking at a 7-year-old boy who had orchestrated a trap that seasoned detectives couldn't have pulled off. A boy who had sat on a terrifying secret for a year, enduring the psychological torture of his home, waiting for the precise, perfect moment to strike when his father had nowhere to run. "You're a very smart boy, Tommy," Johnson finally whispered. "I'm not smart," I said, looking back down at my paper. "I just miss my brother." They arrested Michael Wilson that evening at his hotel. He fought the officers, screaming about his rights, screaming that Sarah was insane and that she had poisoned me against him. But Johnson had the warrant, and they had the forensics. During the interrogation, Johnson didn't yell. He didn't slam the table. He just walked into the room, set a tablet down in front of Michael, and pressed play. It was my interview on the porch. Michael watched his perfect, cultivated narrative disintegrate. He watched his 7-year-old son clinically dismantle his alibi. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow, terrified shell. "He's lying," Michael whispered, but his voice cracked. "He's just a kid. You can't believe him." "We checked the black plastic bag, Michael," Johnson said quietly. "Sarah's fingerprints aren't on the tape. Yours are. The tape is layered over itself 3 times. Your prints are on the sticky side of the bottom layer. You're the one who sealed it." Michael opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "And Dr. Aris found something else." Johnson leaned in, his eyes burning with disgust. The boy scratched the inside of the bag before he froze to death. "We found microplastics under his fingernails. And we found a skin cell. DNA matches you, Michael. He scratched you while you were suffocating him." Michael slumped in his chair. The illusion of the heartbroken father was gone, replaced by the pathetic, cornered coward he truly was. "She was dragging me down," Michael muttered, his eyes vacant. "That freak kid was costing me money. I worked too hard. I built my firm. I wasn't going to let her past ruin my future." "Your future," Johnson said, standing up, "is a 6x8 cell. And I'll personally make sure everyone in general population knows exactly why you're there." The trial was a media circus, but I didn't have to testify. The forensic evidence, combined with Michael's eventual confession to avoid the death penalty, sealed his fate. Life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Mom didn't get off completely free. She was charged with child neglect and failure to report a death. But her defense attorney painted a vivid picture of severe domestic abuse, coercive control, and battered woman syndrome. The judge gave her a suspended sentence and mandatory psychiatric care. She lost custody of me, of course. She wasn't well enough to take care of herself, let alone a child. I was officially adopted by my foster family a year later. They were good people. They didn't yell, they didn't lock doors, and they never bought chest freezers. But sometimes, on hot summer afternoons when the AC units hummed in the windows, I would close my eyes and remember that cold, dead apartment. I visited Mom once at the facility. She looked older, her hair graying at the roots, but her eyes were clear. She hugged me, crying softly, apologizing over and over. I let her hug me. I told her I forgave her, because I knew it was what she needed to hear to heal. But as I walked out of the facility, looking up at the bright blue sky, I knew the truth. I hadn't chosen Dad in that courtroom just to trap him. I chose Dad because I knew Mom was too weak to carry the weight of what happened. Dad was the monster who did it, but Mom was the coward who let it happen. I punished them both in the only way a 7-year-old could. I took away Dad's freedom, and I took away Mom's son. I stopped at the corner of the street and looked back. Life is a lot like a custody battle. You don't always get to choose the good option. Sometimes, you just have to choose the one that burns the whole house down so you can finally build something new on the ashes. I adjusted my backpack, turned away from the past, and began to walk home.